Good morning, everyone. Lachlan Jones, Lockie, was 3 years and 8 months old when he died. He would have been 9 years old next month.
So begins the new season of Boy in the Water, the award-winning podcast about little Lockie Jones, whose lifeless body was found face up in Gore's sewage oxidation pond in January 2019. The police said he had run away from his home, climbed a fence to the ponds, fallen in and drowned. Case closed. But now we're in the coroner's court in Invercargill, and for the next 23 gripping episodes, we get a day-by-day account from Newsroom's investigations team Melanie Reid and Bonnie Sumner. I'm Sharon Brett-Kelly, and today on The Detail, the inquest and what it revealed to Mel and Bonnie, who have spent years trying to unravel the case. And just a warning, some of the content may be disturbing. We hear from Mel first.
Well, it's almost as if we created the story in a way, in our own way. And I don't mean that in an arrogant sense, but I mean that the case was closed, and it was reinvestigated and it was essentially closed again. And then we took all the medical files that we could get and go overseas, which, as you know, the finding from the UK pathologist is that you cannot say that this was a drowning. The quote is, "There is not the pathological evidence to support a diagnosis of drowning." So we do know it very well.
The first few minutes of that episode 1 of season 2 of Boy in the Water, you introduce the coroner, and the coroner you just feel so much empathy from the coroner, don't you? I mean, he sounded either nervous or quite emotional to me when he first introduced himself and said he didn't have the privilege of knowing Lockie.
The loss of a young life like Lockie's and the impact this will have had on you is unimaginable. I say only that, unlike you, I did not have the privilege of knowing Lockie, but that he is now my responsibility.
Huge empathy, but huge intelligence, so I think it's a good combination. Has a memory, phenomenal memory. Yeah, it was like he always knew when the lawyers had forgotten something or couldn't find something, he knew which page it was on and which name it related to every time.
We should talk about the mother, because this is the first time we've heard from her.
Our first witness is Lockie's mum.
This will be the first time Lockie's mother has spoken publicly in over 5 years. She has never talked to us or any other media, despite many requests.
And you've been trying all these years to speak to her and she's just refused. So what was that like for you to hear from her for the first time?
Well, it was extraordinary, really, because I guess you didn't really know what to expect. And obviously she was recounting everything that happened, how it happened, when it happened, and we knew all the timelines. We had read the 111 call so many times. So it was quite enlightening listening to her version of events.
He was fearless. Like, you had to hold him and say, "Lockie, don't fall into the water." And I don't think he understood really the hazards, like the road and everything. He just wasn't at that age where he got it. It made me anxious because he was really confident he'd just run off, and he was really confident he could climb really easy, and he was a fast runner.
I think it was great for listeners and for everyone because, she hasn't had a voice in this, so I think it's really important that was aired, and we did give it 3 or 4 episodes, I think, for that to occur. So we didn't just do 1 or 2 episodes on her.
Yeah, it was really important for us, if we were going to do a daily podcast out of the inquest, out of Courtroom 4 in Invercargill, that it was really lightly edited and that we just sort of helped it along in terms of saying, right, now we're going to go here or we're going to talk about this, and that there was no judgment, there was no opinion, it's just here it all is.
Yeah. Also interesting that she was behind a screen.
She has applied to give evidence by another mode for health reasons, and will be giving evidence from behind screen. and we'll need to take a brief adjournment for the courtroom to be reconfigured to allow that to happen.
The court wasn't quite prepared for that event because I think they were like whiteboards or something that
And
were
ball
kind of
clips and
jimmied together, which is fine.
she was behind
but
whiteboards.
pretty
So
much.
you couldn't
yeah.
actually see her.
No.
So the whole idea is that she was completely screened from the public gallery.
So people couldn't see her. I mean, it's the real life stuff that you can't script, isn't it? That's what we hear, and that is what kind of is the surprise element, the shock element.
I know. I mean, a lot of people have sort of come to us and said, oh, this is the sort of podcast that we think would be produced out of New York or something, because it was just so extraordinary that we're doing a daily podcast out of what had become quite a well-known case. And so, if you think about it, there's kind of about 25 seats in the public gallery, but so many New Zealanders got to witness the entire thing as if they were there. And I think that's why it became so popular.
Yeah, but why so popular overseas? What is it? I mean, this is such a New Zealand story in so many ways, with the voices, the small town atmosphere, that kind of thing. Why do you think it's got people listening?
Well, if you look at the really popular, say, Netflix series or podcasts overseas, they are often about small towns, mysteries, extraordinary circumstances, the possibles, the probables. So it just has those elements, I guess.
And I think that also it's about the fundamental part of this case has always been the institutional failures, and that's really, I think, where it sits internationally. I mean, that's a universal concept, right? So I think that resonates with people everywhere.
And especially here, I think, because it is the reason that we've kind of done the story, or a lot of our work is around institutional failures and also the kind of establishment backing the establishment and how hard it is to get through that. So if you look at, say, the uplift stories that we've done, people have had to get through Oranga Tamariki, the police, the Ministry of Health, and there's so many institutions to get through. I mean, I often talk about it or refer to it as the rolling files. They roll from one government agency to the next. And so this, again, is one of those cases that if you are, say, for example, Paul Jones, and you think there's something untoward about the death of your son, how do you get from a police investigation being closed to a coroner's inquest? Well, you come to us.
We'll explore that later in the podcast, but I want to know what has emerged from Courtroom 4 in Invercargill that surprised Mel and Bonnie.
The fan mail for Simon Mount, Casey.
I know. Well, we just get private message after private message about Simon Mount, how that he's their imaginary boyfriend, that they love him, that they just want to listen to him.
Just to explain my role, I'm counsel assisting the coroner together with Ms Gordon. So my questions are mainly designed to clarify certain points.
He has a fan club.
He has a massive fan club.
Why?
I think because he is intelligent and he is clear and he is kind of quite gentle, but he's almost like a spider catching a fly. He just sort of weaves around and around and around, and it gets tighter and tighter until they choke. But also, I think it surprised me, like, when they lined up all the police and they were all just throwing each other under the bus so badly that it was like we were joking that one of them was going to need shoulder surgery because everyone was just getting thrown under the bus. And so...
You mean they were throwing each other under the bus?
Oh, no, that was them and that was... Well, they were all working together. And also other things that surprised me, that it was so blatant that they were throwing each other. It wasn't me, it wasn't me, it wasn't me, it was him, it was him, it was her, it was him, it was him, blah, blah. So there was all of that. And then there were other instances where I absolutely know people were fibbing because I know the case so well and I know who knows who. Gore's a small place. I know half the people in Gore, as well. And it's like, that's pretty interesting that you're going to try and pull that one because it's a dangerous, dangerous game when you start bullshitting. So there was that. And then, Yeah, I mean, there were times, like you said, that I just felt like I was in the courtroom, just like holding my breath.
I thought Detective Inspector Stu Harvey was quite surprising.
Why?
Why is that, Bonnie?
Polite. I just thought it was very interesting that he was so honest about what he didn't think he had to do in terms of his job, which I thought, I mean, this is your job, to do an investigation. He was in charge of the reinvestigation. And he was very almost belligerent about not having done certain parts of that reinvestigation when Simon Mount was cross-examining him. And I just thought, oh, it's very interesting that you're so honest about not feeling like you didn't have to do certain things, like re-interview certain people or interview certain people or find out different routes that Lockie could have walked or, you know, that kind of information. I just thought that was, you know, he was sort of putting it back to Simon Mount as if it was something that, well, if someone had suggested it to me, then I would have done it.
Do I take it then it was your view that because of that eyewitness evidence wasn't necessary for the police to explore those alternative propositions, for example, that Lockie could have been brought into the ponds from a different route?
Oh, I'd have to have an example of what route he could have come in on.
Well, this may be a point that Mr Simpkins will explore with you, but I think what Mr Dawkins was saying in his letter was that unless the police actively investigated alternative routes, then the investigation itself would be incomplete.
As I say, I'd have to have somebody would have to ask me, could he have taken this route?
I think really what Bonnie really means, if I can step
Absolutely.
in over the top, is that there wasn't, you know, the reinvestigation was pretty lame. And that was very apparent in the court. And so if we ever thought it wasn't going to be, you know, I guess we sort of thought, look, the investigation's going to be pretty robust. But when it came down to it, as I said, the spider circled the fly.
There was the extraction of data from Ms Officer's phone.
We did that, yeah.
Can I check whether the brothers were asked for consent to have their cell phones examined?
I can't recall 100%. I know that there was a number of witnesses that didn't have the same cell phones, and I think at least one of them may have been in that category. They didn't have the cell phone anymore.
But in terms of whether either of the brothers was asked for consent?
I'll just explain to you that I can't recall whether that was done.
One of the things that really surprised me was that a lot of the witnesses were spending a lot of time with the police, and I didn't really understand that. So we're talking about the neighbours, the eyewitnesses, some of the other police, people that were really critical to the case. The mum had her own lawyer and Paul Jones had his own lawyer, the two sons. So they were all categorised as police witnesses. And I didn't understand that because I had this idea that everyone was going to be kind of very neutral. And so I went to the Justice Department and said, well, look, why is it that the police are spending all this time in these private rooms with all the witnesses that are going onto the stand? Like, it doesn't sort of make sense to me. And they said, oh, well, they are in fact police witnesses.
But are you saying that at the courthouse,
Yes.
these witnesses are going into, what, meetings?
Private meeting rooms with the police.
While the inquest is going on?
Yes.
So is there a suggestion that they're sort of rehearsing what they're saying or something?
Well, I don't know, but
schooled in how to answer a question?
We don't know, but there were some interesting turns of phrase that sort of popped up between witnesses a number of times.
Similar, that they were saying similar things.
And I asked one of the witnesses, I said, how come you were in the room with the police? And she said, well, I'm working with the police.
That's right.
Because what you have to remember in this case is that there's a fair few agendas running. So the police are saying it's a drowning, so they're doing everything they can to say that it's a drowning. Now, and also in this equation is the Gore Council, who want it not to be a drowning because otherwise they are in trouble over the lack of fencing or gates into the pond, even though they've already had their WorkSafe case. So you've got these two forces, if you like, and then Paul Jones is like, I just want to know what happened to my kid, and the mum is like, well, he ran away and walked out the pond and drowned.
I thought another interesting thing was how many officers, police officers, senior police officers were present for a lot of the inquest, and I understand that they needed to have one to usher in the witnesses, but to have two there every day, day in, day out.
Detective Inspector Stu Harvey every day.
And another detective with him, and then to have, the area commander, Mike Bowman, coming in regularly. You just sort of got to the point where someone commented, didn't they, where they said, there must not be a lot of crime in Southland because all the detectives are here.
The potential outcome of this case, the coroner points out this is not criminal court. So
it feels like it is.
In fact, I think it's even more revealing than criminal court in a lot of ways.
Fact-finding mission, they call it.
Fact-finding, yeah. The way some of these witnesses are challenged, I'm thinking the neighbour, Debbie, the question that she was asked is just like...
About the 111 call, do you mean? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. I can't believe he's done this, Debbie. He was just in your laundry. What was he doing there in the first place? He went to visit you. He went to your... He's been funny. And that was...
Where are we going with this and talking about Lockie being in the laundry and...
Well, what happened there is that was sort of mounted as finest, probably.
You remember hearing that?
Yeah, I do remember hearing that.
Would you agree with me that there's a real sound of surprise in your voice? What was he doing there in the first place?
Yes, but is that me?
Well, I don't think there was anyone else called Debbie, was there?
But then she goes, Debbie, yeah, well, it must have been. I can't... Yeah, there was a surprise in my voice.
Yes. And it sounded like you were hearing that for the first time, this idea that he was in your laundry.
Yeah, but I knew he was in my laundry when Michelle come to my house.
Because she'd always said that she heard him, but she didn't see him. So there was a kind of challenge to her hearing him. And then they played the 111 call. She was absolutely surprised when the mother said, well, he was in your laundry. And she's like, well, what was he doing there?
Mm. So there's kind of this sort of mini drama inside the bigger drama in the court. Because
there's plenty of those in Gore, I can tell you.
But gosh, I do wonder what this is doing to the town, to the people of the town. Because it's created so much tension. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that everyone's got a view on it. And I think it was worse when nothing was happening. I think it's better now that everything's being aired. I don't think it's easy for anyone, but I do think that when we first went there in 2020, everyone was like, oh, we know why you'll be here. We know why you'll be here. I hope you can find out what happened to that little boy. And that was, that was like 4 years ago. So there was a real kind of feeling of sort of distress, wasn't there, in the town? Because there was this kind of unanswered question over Lockie's death. And I think now it's probably better for them because it's sort of not underground anymore. It's above the surface and that everybody's talking about it. And I'm sure it's more difficult for some people than others.
Yeah.
And we have to be conscious of that, and we are very conscious of that.
We've got more to come in August, I believe. So do you know what's ahead?
So it's the experts phase. Now the second phase is where we're going to hear from Dr. Alexander Kolar, who's the pathologist we engaged in the UK to review the post-mortem. We'll hear from Dr. Martin Sage, who was a pathologist in Christchurch who didn't do the forensic autopsy because Lockie wasn't sent there. And we'll also hear from Karen Smith, who's a CSI retired detective in the States.
A lot of people are really looking forward to her because she's done 400, 500 hours on this case.
Yeah.
And, she's a crack-hot ex-detective. I really am pretty sure that the police are going to kind of start rolling out the kind of dry drowning theory, because obviously the listeners all know that Lockie was face up and there was no water in his lungs. They talk about that in less than 10% of cases there can be a dry drowning, and so I think there'll be that will be coming in a pretty big way.
Mm. So the coroner's findings, well, hopefully the coroner will find what really happened to Lockie, firstly. But will there be any further...
He might. Good luck with
Are
making
you not
that call.
confident that there will be a clear finding?
Not really.
Oh, you're not?
Are you?
Bonnie?
I'm not sure. I mean, we'll see what the second phase brings. I think that will be very interesting. I'm also hoping that, I know that they're calling, I think, a child psychologist as part of this expert phase. I'm also hoping that they might possibly call perhaps the duty coroners.
Yeah, because you see, one of the big problems in this case, obviously, is that there was no forensic pathology done, so therefore you can't define one way or the other what happened. And so that's been, the biggest failing, and why I say with such confidence it was a debacle of a police investigation. And so, I mean, we really hope there is a clear finding, but honestly, we're not holding our breaths. And obviously it would be great if someone could come to a conclusion, but at the same time, our job was really to show the systemic failure and also find out what happened to Lockie as a result of that. But that was our motivation, was more about the institutional failure all around it. And that's what's been shown really clearly in the podcast is that institutional failing here, every which way you looked almost.
Yes, and will there be anything to come out of that?
I think so. Absolutely.
So
there better be, because we're not doing this for nothing.
It's not the driving force of the coroner's remit, but it will be, I think, part of his determination will probably include some of that, I imagine.
So
some comment on the police case.
handling of it. And so could there
police
be...
failings more than the handling.
Police failings. Mel says they're now working on their next investigation, but there are plenty of cases where people feel they're not getting justice.
There's a whole lot of people that come to us that don't go to lawyers. And I think it's because, the justice is not accessible to New Zealanders anymore, or, has it ever been?
Too expensive, you mean?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, lawyers are between $300 and $400 and $1,100 an hour. I mean, people cannot afford lawyers, and so they don't have any access to justice. And I think I feel really strongly that something needs to happen about this, because you can only get legal aid in this country if you're essentially unemployed or have a very low income. And so any person that's on a middle range income can't afford or has no access to the legal system because they can't afford lawyers. So if you get kicked off ACC, for example, when you want to argue that you shouldn't be, if there's a wrongful dismissal case and you're up against the government department and you're not in a union, if you've been falsely accused, you don't have a shit show in hell in this country of getting anywhere if you're going to go down the legal route, because who can afford it? So there's just this whole levels and layers of people that feel like there's been some kind of injustice and they can't do anything about it. So that's why they come to us.
How many cases are you talking about?
But I mean, we just get cases every day, we can't cover them.
So what can be done about that?
Firing all the journalists in this country isn't a start, or getting rid of all the journalism in New Zealand is a very bad start to trying to fix anything, because, as we've always said, it's a cornerstone of democracy, and we're the people that will fight for the small people. Outfits like Fair Go have been fighting for the small people for decades, and it's a disgrace, in my opinion.
Okay, so firing journalists not good enough, because, the truth is, I think you two are on your own in terms of the time that you give to one case. I mean, who else? What other... I'm just trying to think, is there any other investigative journalist in New Zealand who puts months, years into one case?
Well, it's something I can say about Melanie, is that she absolutely, her dedication and sheer determination to see a story right to the end until we get an actual result is unique, in my opinion.
That's all for this week. The Detail is supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. Alexia Russell produced this podcast and Mark Chesterman engineered it. Thanks to Bonnie Sumner and Mel Reid. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Ka kite.